Hello and welcome to week 3 in Introduction to Sociology, and a great week last week talking about culture and social structure, and looking forward to grading some of that stuff as the week begins here. If we go into Brightspace, we have week 3. We're going to be looking at socialization, and it's a chapter 5 and chapter 6, groups and organizations, and we have the discussion, the assignment for Chapter 5, a discussion and a quiz for Chapter 6, and our first special assignment is due this week. So the sources of information special assignment is basically looking at ways in which we gather information about the world around us. I can't imagine a more important time than to have the discussion about the media and how we get information about the world so we can formulate our sociological imaginations. And so you're going to be taking a topic and looking at it through 3 different sources, and one of them is YouTube or a blog or an online website or something like that. The second one is a newspaper or a news site, and the third one is research, a peer-reviewed article. So there's a little bit of skill building and learning how to use our EBSCO system here at KVCC about how to get a peer-reviewed article, and I'm perfectly willing to answer questions about that. The best people, however, are our librarians, and I urge you to contact them directly. Say, got this assignment for Kavanaugh, he has us do this. They know exactly what you're talking about. I've included all kinds of information in the course book on that assignment, and it does entail that you'll try to answer or describe that sociological phenomenon from those different perspectives and describe the relative validity and reliability of each one and which one is useful for what sort of decisions you need to make on that. And of course, right now, that's a really important thing with the way the media and is being viewed by Americans right now. So where do we go for our great information now? And that's a difficult question to answer. So this week, looking at Chapter 5 and Chapter 6, the first chapter will be socialization. Here, I'll get our course book ready, and here we go. Now, socialization in the context of this class is not getting together with your friends. It is, although I guess that it happens, in that context, but I mean, it's not socialization like I'm engaging in social interaction with people talking about my favorite movie. Socialization is actually the process by which culture, norms, values, expectations, and the use of material culture are passed on from generation to generation. And so within this context, we have agents of socialization, and those agents of socialization will be the focus of this chapter. As we begin in the attention area, I look at this conception, this one author's conception of American values. So we talk about learning values, norms, and expectations. We're looking at values, what's important. Let's look at Wayne Baker's website here. We have the 10 core values. We see number 1, respect for others. Number 2, symbolic patriotism, freedom, security, self-reliance and individualism, equal opportunity, getting ahead, pursuit of happiness, justice and fairness, and critical patriotism. And we can have a dialogue about the validity of these, whether these really do represent the values. I'm certainly, among all of us, we can align ourselves with some of these things, that they are important to us. Where did we learn them? Where did we get? You're not unfamiliar with any one of these, so where did they come from? And they really did come from more than one place. And we're going to look at those different areas that taught you. We're not born with this. We are taught this. This is really in the whole nature-nurture discussion. This is really nurture. It's really this social circle that you're in, the interactions that you have with people in your life are what teach you these things. We align with them, and they become internalized, and they become our own. And we feel like we've developed them ourselves, but the truth is they were given to us, and we then selected based on our environment how we're going to think about things. So getting right into the chapter, we're going to identify key agents of socialization, and then we're going to discuss, what has happened with COVID-19 in terms of our expectations, like everything that we've been taught about our society and how things work. What happened? And we have this new thing that comes along, turns things on its head, and some of those norms and expectations are different now. And we talk about the new normal, and what does that mean, and how does that manifest? There is definitively a new normal, and we will not return to ground zero again. We will not return exactly back where we were prior to COVID. It might be a new age. We have BC and AD. Now we're going to have pre-COVID, post-COVID eras, because I think the changes are going to be rather significant in terms of how our society operates. So I'm going to ask you to start reflecting on that now, anticipating that they're going to greatly affect your life over time. So here we go into socialization. Socialization, we refer, is the entities that teach us about our culture. And here's like a little list. The agents are family, school, the economy, media, military, religion, and our peers. That's why I said, we can be with our peers and they teach us things. These entities in our life teach us our values, norms, and expectations. So we have values that we learn from our family. They may be connected and reinforced in our school, or maybe we learned some new ones when we went to school. Maybe we went to church. Maybe we were in the military and we learned values and norms there. Maybe because of our jobs, our economies, when we go into the economy, we learn little co-cultures that are going on. In fact, kind of what education is all about. When you think about schools being agents of socialization, we can look at elementary schools and we can talk about, what do you learn in kindergarten? Really, really famous book from years ago. There was everything I needed to know I learned in kindergarten, about sharing and caring and, and all those things, how important those lessons are. What else did we learn? The hidden curriculum that's there. We'll talk about that when we specifically talk about schools and socialization. But then when we go in, as we advance, and let's say we come into college and you're in the building program, or you're in accounting, or you're in the nursing program, you are learning the norms, values, and expectations of your culture that you want to be a part of. That group that you want to be a nurse, you have to learn the norms, values, and expectations of being a nurse. And so that's one way in which KVCC, for example, is an agent of socialization, giving you what you need in order to enter into these new groups or categories of individuals. Now, because we're online, I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about where do we get the norms and values for online behavior, this other society, this other parts of society. And this has really taken a hit because, and this is my opinion, but we have a lot of very high profile individuals, including President Trump, who have kind of set a new bar for what can be said online and the kind of interactions that it's not that they weren't before, he's not to blame, but when we have high profile individuals engaging in these kinds of interactions, very divisive, it kind of opens the door. People sort of feel the permission to do that. And so the social media world has become somewhat volatile. I say this as when I'm recording this, Donald Trump is no longer president, and we had Biden just got in, and the relationship between the new administration and social media tools like Twitter is very different. But those platforms have been struggling with where do we draw the line in terms of civil communication, but we don't want to draw it so much that we're interrupting the freedom of communicating thing. So it might actually be a little bit more about how somebody communicates something, how their style. And each one of these media areas, for one, has no obligation for fairness with their users or truth or anything like that. They have no obligation. These are open platforms, but they also own them, so they can be whatever they want in terms of this. So they can block anybody, do whatever. And there's a lot of, confusion as to how they actually do that, and if they're targeting certain people, and it's really hard to actually identify those patterns. But nonetheless, they're struggling with. This is a real world thing going on as we kind of examine this kind of stepping back from the actual content and saying how difficult it would be when your whole business is on the line and you're trying to make sure people don't get hurt, you're trying to make sure that people have a fair voice, you're trying to be equitable, you're trying to be a service for all, and that's it places those individuals in some very difficult situations. And so we'll be looking at the online world later and looking at some darker underbelly of that particular world too. So I put a video in there about netiquette, and these are the kind of the expectations we have here at KV. The discussion boards are not Twitter, they're not your Facebook site, they're not Instagram. This is a professional place, a workplace, expected to have a pretty high level of behavior and refrain from attacking anybody or using profanity or anything like that. And you will be called out on that if that happens. And we don't want that kind of environment. But that's part of what it takes to create an equitable online environment, something that I think in our country we're struggling to have. And it's resulted in many people giving up on some of those social platforms because it's just not pleasant sometimes when your inbox or your feed is continually filled with negativity like that. So that's an aspect. So the online world teaches us as well. I mean, there's when you sign up for services, they teach you what they're expecting from you. In terms of learning online, we've seen new expectations now as an educational institution. We're telling you that we can't meet face to face, so there's going to be a lot more of these kind of either recorded videos or live Zooms, and then you learn about doing that. You learn about what's in your backgrounds, whether you should be eating in this camera or not, how to turn off your camera, turn off your audio, where do the pets go, all these kinds of new things that you've never had to worry about. I mean, I think for some of you, you're like, wow, my whole class can see my bedroom now. Like, that's new. That was never an issue when you were going to class and meeting face to face. But these are new things that we have to contend with, new technical abilities that we have to have, new ways of learning when the teaching is mediated through technology. And that was actually my dissertation study, was the actual effect of teaching as it passes through media, being either a website or video or something like that. Everything aside from face to face. What happens then? Now, there's certain advantages certainly that we've had in terms of communication and timing and the ability to have face-to-face conversations in a much more flexible way. And there's certainly some great advantages, but there's been some deficits as well in terms of the personal connection and understanding when people are actually comprehending things. Maybe like before the test, if I'm in a class, I usually was able to kind of scan the audience, and if I recognized the facial features of someone who just did not understand what we were talking about, I could take that person aside. That's not here. It wasn't in my online classes before, but now that we're in this era where students like yourselves are being forced to take online classes that you might not have wanted to before, there's a lot of adaptation that's going on. So what is this? It all adds up to this, looking at all of this, these are examples within a context of all these institutions in your life. And that's sort of the assignment for this week, is to think about those institutions in your life, the institution of the family, the institution of school, the economy, your friends, if you had a military experience. What did they teach you? What did they teach you that made you the person you are? and now you've adopted those and they're a significant part of your identity. The last part of the chapter asks about COVID. Now, along comes a disruption, and that disruption has caused us to have to change our ways, to change the ways in which we're doing things. And I would say, even as a person who really enjoys face-to-face interaction in the classroom, there are some very clear advantages for doing it this way in terms of you'd have a recording of my views on this particular thing. We have a stream of consciousness going on in terms of communication. We can have long dialogues outside of the timing of a classroom. The pressure to be called on and all those things are gone. And people can take their time in their responses. There's lots of advantages, but it certainly has changed things, changed the culture of KV, changed those norms, values, and expectations. So I want you to see this as really an opportunity to describe for yourself, how has your work changed? How has your family changed? How has your going to church changed? We talked about how your school has changed, all these experiences that you're having as a result of this pandemic, to get some discussion going on about that. So when we look at what's expected for this particular week, we have the discussion, which is the new normal, what's going on in what I just said, having a discussion about that and supporting each other's challenges with that. And then the assignment is to kind of look at these agents. And this is the family, school, economy, the media, military, religion, your peers. And you're going to be looking at 2 of those agents. I want you to pick 2 of them and go into identifying values, norms, and expectations, and possibly material culture that you learn. Be comprehensive. Each one of these should be a page or 2, each one of those agents in terms of describing what you learn from them. The more depth you go into this assignment, the more you're going to get out of it, and understanding really the source of what you've known, the source of who you are, really largely comes from these agents. So please put the work into it. I'm going to be expecting to see a fairly comprehensive treatment of each one of those, telling me what you learned from them. That you say, I got a good work ethic from the military. Insufficient. You have to go into a lot more than that. So put that work into these assignments, and these concepts really start to dig in and you know them very well. That's why I designed the assignments the way they are. Okay, so moving right along, we talk about groups and organizations. And of course, I hope you see the similarity here. All those agents are groups and organizations that you belong to. And so we talk about socialization in a general process of teaching us the norms, values, and expectations of an individual culture, either grand culture or the culture of a group or organization. So when we join the snowmobile club, we get the bylaws, we get the rule book, we get and that. Maybe we go to an orientation, we pay a fee, maybe we have someone that we can call to ask questions. We learn, trail care, we learn all kinds of things when we join that. We've joined a group, and that group has a culture. In fact, that's kind of what defines a group. A group is, it has largely a combination, as with anything, maybe a formal, sometimes just informal culture. In families, for example, when you join a family, you marry into a family, you become part of that group. And it's probably pretty rare that you get a formal orientation and a policy manual. But you are introduced, when you come to my house, it's really important that you take your shoes off at the door, even though that might not be a standard of behavior in your home. But mom is really picky about her carpets. So that's a new rule. That's a socialization as you acclimate to this new group. Every time you get a new job, you're joining a group, and it's kind of going into the idea of organizations. Now, organizations usually have a combination of policy manuals and an informal culture and structure and bureaucracy having to do with getting the business done. So one of the first things we get is usually a job description. This is your status and role in this organization and how it relates to the people around you. So these are all ways in which we are socialized to the culture of an organization and our place in it. So let's take a look at some of the content in the course book. Here are groups and organizations. I go into this kind of giving this idea of a status symbol associated with the group. Each one of these individuals is HIV positive, and certainly to wear a shirt like this, the point of this is this stark part of our identity, this aspect of their identity being public with it. You know, the coming out of aspects that we might belong to groups that, or categories more, you know, we might belong to groups that we are not comfortable with sharing with the whole world. So there's, but yet they may be in very important parts of our identity. And so this is an example of how that might manifest. We're also, in terms of what we're going to discuss, is we're going to be talking about our identity related to the groups that we belong to. And I'm going to slip in a little bit of content about McDonaldization, which is a concept that is important to discuss because it's manifesting in a lot of organizations. So when we go into organizations, the experience we have in the modern industry has been impacted by this concept of McDonaldization. So I wanted to get that set of values associated with McDonaldization because we see how it manifests in different places. And it's not always a pleasant thing. So I want to get some discussion about that particular concept. So we start off here with social groups. Social groups are defined technically as two or more people. They interact frequently, have a shared sense of belonging and a feeling of interdependence, and that what binds them is the culture that they share. We need to be, psychologically, we need to be associated with groups. It's a very, very important part of our identity. When we think about, even in our very individual world, and it's interesting to watch this manifest in the entertainment industry, for example. When we refer to each other and we have a name, we have a first name, which is our given name, that selects us as an individual in the family. In my core family, I'm the only Mark. It would be odd to have two children in the same family with the same name. So that provides that individual. And then our last name is the next level of groups that we're associated with. So my last name is Kavanaugh, and so that associates me with a larger set of people, a primary socializing group and deep part of my identity, and people who have that last name. Now, contemplate for a minute the notion of individuals who are in the entertainment industry who have progressed to that, in that place where they've changed their name, or interestingly enough, they just go by their first name. And so we have one of my favorite artists is Sting, and you don't have to say much more than that. People who are familiar with the past 30 years of music are familiar with his role in the Police, the band The Police, and also as a solo artist. His name is Gordon Sumner. That's Sting's real name, and I'm sure on his checks, and there's a lot of them, it says Gordon Sumner. But yet, he established an identity that separates him from not only his given name, but his family name, the Sumner family. I mean, he had a mom and a dad, but his public view, his public persona, is a one-word title. Then we have Madonna, who's Madonna Chacon. I think her last name is Chacon. And so she kept her first name, but that all you need is her first name. She kept her first name, but in terms of the record labels, lost her last name. We have Prince, who sadly passed away, but even went through a period of time of creating a name for himself that was actually a symbol, and legally changed his name to that symbol, and referred to make that a when he was being discussed in the media or anything, it'd be the artist formerly known as Prince. So it was just like, wow, there's that. And then John Mellencamp, who came out as John Cougar years ago, and then he was John Cougar Mellencamp, and then now he's John Mellencamp, and sometimes you just see him as Mellencamp. And there's something about that last name that he had that salespeople didn't think it was going to go. Let's just call you John Cougar. Sounds a little bit more adventurous, and then gradually moving his career to that he could actually reunite with his real last name. This is interesting stuff, how how our identities are associated with our names. And these groups come out right at the get-go, right in our face. Let's say that we have our first name and then our last name. And then in cultures where the group affiliation might be more important than the individual, you'll have the last name that occurs before the first name. And my understanding is that is how names work in countries like Japan and China, where I'll give you my last name at the beginning and then have my first name. So I'd be Kavanaugh Mark. So Kavanaugh being the thing that I put out to the public as the more important thing. I'm of the Kavanaugh clan. I am Mark within that clan. And you see the differences of culture in terms of identity and the importance of group affiliation. So we talk about groups. We look at my family. Here's some examples of mine. I'm part of a group at. Look at this. Oh, this is hilarious. This content has been around for a long time. It still says KVTC, Kennebec Valley Technical College. I might leave it like that just because it's interesting. But KVCC is where I work. But the professors at KVCC, I'm a member of a band. I'm a member of this class. I have particular associations with that. Now, when we talk about groups, and I mentioned it a little bit before, we want to make sure that we distinguish this from other gatherings of people that are not groups. Remember, groups associate with each other frequently and have a shared identity. You have to have both of those. So there's other kinds of ways in which people come together. Let's say at a concert or at a beach, you look at a whole bunch of people there who would all be affected by something that happened. So if there was a whale that washed up on the beach, it would affect all those people that are on the beach. But we're not a group. We're an aggregate. It's an aggregate of people. People at a concert, there's an aggregate. Maybe at a concert there's a sense of identity. We're all here for our favorite band, but we don't interact anymore necessarily unless we're there with another group or something, or unless you're following the Grateful Dead when they used to do that. These same people following all over the place might call them a group, but but concerts are generally an aggregate. And then there are those individuals who share a characteristic, and we call those categories. So men and women are sex categories. The different genders are gender categories. The races are it's racial categories, and that's actually the correct term. They're not racial groups. They're not group. We don't refer to trans individuals as a group. It's a category. Now there might be groups of people who are trans that do interact a lot together and have a shared identity, but the masses of people who are trans are not they're not a group, they're a category. And that's part of the way that the science of sociology tries to understand the different ways in which groups interact with us, and we interact with groups. The other part about groups that's important is when we are considering a group's impact on our identity, different groups have different impact. And we can kind of examine this by looking at the categorization of groups themselves as primary, secondary, and reference groups. So primary groups are groups to which you will always belong to. You're born into them. They are very important to your identity. Could not see your life without that, good or bad. And so if you were born into a family and you've separated yourself from that family because it was destructive or whatnot, the sad reality is you're still part of that group. And there's just no in and outs about it. You don't have to interact, but part of your identity is still established there. And you can successfully ignore that and minimize its impact, but yet it's still there. And then the groups that you choose to join that become central to your identity, we can kind of refer to those as primary groups. Now, secondary groups have a characteristic of them that they have utility. You join those groups to get something done. Now, it might be, if you kind of think about, let's say your work group. When you first join that group, it's to get a job, express yourself vocationally, to make money. It has that secondary group quality to it. But maybe that group has some primary aspects to it as you have been with that group for a very long time. So you can see how secondary groups can transition into a little bit of primary characteristics there. And then we have, wholeheartedly secondary groups. I belong to to AAA. I guess it's not really a group, but anyway, I'll go with the example. I belong to AAA because I get the AAA benefits. It'd be that way. The church that I go to, I belong there because it helps me in my spiritual journey. There's pieces of that group that have primary qualities to them because of how close they are to my ambitions, but fundamentally a secondary group. Coming to school, we don't expect you to be here forever. We expect you to use us in a way. So we use secondary groups as a means to an end. Now, the one that's really the most clever and the most interesting to me is reference groups. And reference groups, here's the thing, you can't belong to a reference group. You're not a member, but you look to that group and you imitate it, or you strive to be part of that group. Once you become part of that group, it becomes either primary or secondary. But while you're not part of that group and you're looking to that to be a part, you're looking as a role model or whatever, it's your reference group. You're referring to it and you're modifying your behavior to bring it closer to being a member of that group. So all of you that are in a major right now, and you're nursing or PT or OT or mental health or psychology, is you're not a PT yet, you're not an OT yet, you're not a nurse yet, you're a wannabe. So you're learning about those cultures, those groups, so that you can eventually be part of them. So they're your reference group. So if you're a nurse, if you're a student nurse, you're looking at your instructors as, well, I don't want to be them, but I want to be a nurse, so like them. I want to be part of that group. I want to be a part of people that say they're nurses. That's been my ambition, or mental health, or a line worker, or any one of those things. You have ambitions to be part of that group. So you go to school to learn. You use school to learn what you need to do to enter into that group. And the entrance might be a ceremony, might be a license, might be a status, it might be all of those, and then you're now a member of the group. And so that's kind of the way reference groups work. So along with the groups in terms of identity, groups themselves have interactions. They have dynamic interactions. There's energy in groups. And we can examine, depending on the complexity and formalization of a group. There might be specific delineated ways of communication. So in an organization, for example, like say KVCC, if I want to get something done, it might actually not be my responsibility directly. I may have to go through a chain of command of people who are responsible, get permission, get the budget, get this. Then I have to consult IT and, do all these things. The ways in which we interact and the way in which behavior and interactions are manifested are a result of policy manuals that delineate these relationships. In a family, it might be different, but you might have informal ways. If you want to get, just maybe humorously, you might have a family where, mom is drawing the line on things, but if you go ask dad, he'll usually let you do it, kind of thing. And kids learn that. And then they can take advantage of understanding that. Now, mind you, within organizations, there is also that informal culture. In fact, when I was teaching about rehabilitation, I thought that this was a very critical part of organizational culture, such as the workplace, is to learn not only the formal culture, but the informal culture. And we'll be getting into that when we talk about work and the economy. But groups also interact, and they have components of their structure of people's statuses and roles. They have job descriptions within this group. Who's the leader? Who's the one that's taking care of certain aspects of the group? Who's monitoring the group? Who has the final decision making? Who's managing the resources of the group? What work is the group doing, and how is that group divided among members? All of these things, we refer to them as group dynamics. And the personalities that make up the individual personalities, if we're going to look at small groups especially, we can see that those are very fundamental into understanding how that group operates and functions, and even determining how well it functions. Now finally, we move into the McDonaldization of society. And what this generally comes down to, and I'm going to let the video really describe this more than anything, is, and there's a reason why they call it the McDonaldization. It's a way in which industry and many parts of our society have moved toward a value of productivity. That productivity is a principal goal of our existence. And this has potentially harmful effects on human beings. And let's just get into the McDonaldization. And the reason why the author of McDonaldization called it McDonaldization was because McDonald's Corporation is one of the best examples of this manifestation of ultimate surveying of productivity that has then infected lots of other organizations like Walmart, the big box stores, and has even come down into areas of medicine and education. And that's where it's kind of like, ooh, okay, where are we going with this? And so let's look at the principles of a group or organization that is engaged in the processes of McDonaldization, as it says in the course book here. One of the questions is control. How has standardization, I'm actually applying this to education here, but control. That is the value system. McDonaldization wants to control pieces of the process, understand all the processes, how they happen, when they happen, to whom they happen, and who does them. Second is efficiency. Minimal energy, minimal time, produce the most product. Predictability. We understand this chain, how it's going, so I can understand if I make changes over here, I can predict changes that occur across the entire process. And if something comes along, I have fairly good predictability in terms of what's going to happen if something gets interfered with, or like say COVID comes along and interferes with something. Can we predict how these things will happen? And then calculability. Need to be able to produce numbers that justify, that show and demonstrate change in productivity and change in what the outcomes and how they basically show me how this expensive effort has produced something. Now, the kind of social science perspective on this has actually been around for a long time. Kind of grows out of the personnel engineering field that started to develop way back in the Industrial Revolution. When you're looking at manufacturing and you're looking at productivity in a manufacturing plant, then how fast somebody can do their step in a procedure is vital to how much you can predict is going to come out the end, how much you're going to sell, and how much you're going to make as the owners of the means of production. And so minimizing the time for someone to be able to produce something not only produced mechanization. A machine can move way faster than a human being. So we want to mechanize the things that can be mechanized, but we can also take slices of a production and make it extremely efficient in terms of that person's role. Let's say your role is to attach two electrodes to two components to a circuit board, and you would have your tools hanging down, you have all your parts right within reach, you're at a comfortable workstation, plenty of light, and you can work extremely fast, just going like you're a machine. And part of what we recognized in industries like that is that individuals who were seen as machines began to see themselves as machines. And this is less than human. So in that era of development, we saw a lot of industries that took advantage of their workforce, evaluated them simply on how many widgets they could produce an hour. Individuals could, as they aged, they may have become better at what they did, but since they couldn't produce as much, they could be pushed out of the market for younger people. I mean, all kinds of ways, not only in terms of having a job and doing a job, but just the sort of distancing of the individual and perception of themselves as just a cog in the wheel. So we see that happening in industry. And even though some people like manufacturing that is really based around that has a long-term effect on those individuals of disenfranchising themselves from the actual joy of work or joy of what work could be. And there's some philosophers and thinkers within that field that there's certain kinds of work that even though they're routine and whatnot, and some people like to do those, they're not worthy of the complexity and beauty of the human being, that is capable of doing so much. It's like a waste of a good resource. They could be doing so much more. There's debate on that, because some people, their focus is not on what they do for work. It's elsewhere, and work is just very utilitarian. I get this job, I can do it, I don't have to worry about it, I don't have to bring it home, it's not complicated, it pays all the bills, and I can volunteer at my church. That's where I get my identity. So I'm not really throwing all this out. But the notion is that these when we bring these into fields such as production, it's fairly easy to see the math and how it works. If I can make my worker efficient, I can give them all what they need and blah, 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 they're going to produce more. But the problem becomes when we start to apply these same principles in areas that don't produce X number of output. Things like medicine and education. And medicine and education have become increasingly McDonaldized to their detriment. And think about this in terms of its application to education. I have some examples in the course book. I kind of got into them a little bit. So where do we see control? How is standardization and uniformity manifested in education? Standard testing, standard material, standard teaching methods, blah, blah, blah. Has that made us less creative? Can teachers, I know of teachers in the public school system that can't design their own curriculum. Not because they can't do it, they don't have the skill. They're not allowed to because the curriculum is served to them, and this is what you have to teach, and this is how you have to teach it. And there's questions about that because the literature that supports that notion is being misapplied in terms of what actually works for different kids who have different ways of learning that only the teacher, live and flexible, can respond to. Now another one, efficiency. Woo! We all learn things at different speeds. When we enter into the education process, and we talk about this in psych and developmental psych, we're assimilating and accommodating information all the time. And we're sometimes good at that, we're sometimes not so good at that. And that is the process of timing. And how fast can we take information in? It's interesting, for example, that the politics of education have more and more emphasized the notion that individuals are going from high school, let's say, and not as many going into college, okay? And people coming into college and failing out because of maturity issues or skill-based issues or economic challenges or whatever. And then at the same time, you're having an argument of, well, why can't people have an associate's degree by the time they're done their high school? And it's this, let's cram information into people so that they can enter the workplace earlier, more efficiently. And while this may work for some people, it's not probably a good general policy that's not responsive to the different speeds at which people learn, and even at that age, the changing ambitions of individuals, the things that they want to do. They might not be in the position to make a decision as to what they want to do in the direction that they want to go in. Predictability, I can tell you, it's actually poor practice for an instructor to try and predict how things are going to go, because you never know when the fire is going to get lit underneath somebody and they're going to get into something. And there might be people that came in very energetic and then just, kind of talked them out of the field. I think I've done that a couple times. And finally, calculability, and this is probably the one that we're dealing with the most, and this is the concept of education assessment. Basically, show me what the person has learned. And the problem with that is, while I think that that's valuable and is certainly a demonstration to you, grading and whatnot, it's definitely a demonstration that yes, you have achieved this particular level of proficiency. Those assessments that we use, for one, are not really tested. They're not often tested in terms of their validity. The A that you got was the grade you got on that assignment, but that's only useful to the effect that the assignment was a good measure of that skill. And there's not a whole lot of testing that goes on with that. But I think also in education, as with this discussion we're having right now, it's very difficult to measure some of the things that people get out of being in an educational environment. The introspection that they've done, the changes in their norms, values, and expectations, the changes in their perspective of the world, the changing sociological imagination, those kinds of things, they actually resist assessment, even though if I taught this class from the point of view of you have to know the dates in which certain individuals produce certain theories in the field of sociology and events and dates of current, theories and whatnot in sociology, you might be able to do that, and that's easy to measure, but it might not be the most important thing you get out of a class like sociology, where you might, even as I'm talking right now, you might be looking at your own work and thinking, there are some McDonaldization pieces in there. I have to meet criteria. There's dates in which things being done have to be done. There's a certain, impersonalness between, employees and the HR policies and stuff like that. All these manifestations of the modern workplace, of which are both good and bad. And there's the balance that has to be struck between developing a profitable industry and dehumanization. So I leave you with that, a little bit about McDonaldization there. Watch the videos and all that. The first discussion is on McDonaldization. How is this man, how have you seen this? Where have you seen this in ways that's it's appropriate? And where have you seen this in ways that it's rather disruptive? And we can kind of have that dialogue about that. And then in the quiz, I ask you to identify primary and secondary groups. Remember, primary identity, secondary utility, and then reference groups. You can't be a member of them yet. This is a group you want to be a part of, or groups that you would like to be a part. Maybe it's millionaires, and I want to be a millionaire. I'm not part of that group yet, but this is what I'm doing to get there. So that's this week's material, talking about groups and socialization. And I look forward to seeing what you produce in the class this week. Take care.